Chapter 24 of The Life of Florence Nightingale by Sarah Tooley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Later Years. The Nightingale Home. Rules for Probationers. Deaths of Mr. and Mrs. Nightingale. Death of Lady Verney. Continues to visit Claydon. Health Crusade. Rural Hygiene. A Letter to Mothers. Introduces Village Missioners. Village Sanitation in India. The Diamond Jubilee. Balaclava Dinner. When a noble life has prepared old age, it is not the decline that it reveals, but the first days of immortality. Madame de Staël. Miss Nightingale's work for the profession which her name and example had lifted into such high repute continued with unabated energy. The year 1871 brought what must have seemed like the crowning glory of her initial work, when the Nightingale Home and Training School was opened as an integral portion of the new St. Thomas's Hospital, the finest institution of its kind in Europe. This circumstance added greatly to the popularity of nursing as a profession for educated women. Queen Victoria had laid the foundation stone of the new hospital on May 13, 1868, on the fine site skirting the Thames Embankment, opposite the Houses of Parliament. It was erected on the block system, which Miss Nightingale has always recommended, and she took a keen interest in all the model appliances and arrangements introduced into this truly palatial institution for the sick. The hospital extends from the foot of Westminster Bridge along the river to Lambeth Palace, and has a frontage of 1,700 feet. It is built in 8 separate blocks, or pavilions. The 6 center blocks are for patients, the one at the north end next Westminster Bridge is for the official staff, and the one at the south end is used for lecture rooms and a school of medicine. Each block is 125 feet from the other, but coupled by a double corridor. The corridor fronting the river forms a delightful terrace promenade. Each block has 3 tiers of wards above the ground floor. The operating theater is capable of containing 600 students. A special wing in one of the northern blocks was set apart for the Nightingale Home and Training School for nurses. All the arrangements of this wing were carried out in accordance with Miss Nightingale's wishes. The hospital contains, in all, 1,000 distinct apartments, and the building cost $500,000 of money. It was opened by Queen Victoria on June 21, 1871, and the Times, in its account of the proceedings, is lost in admiration of the lady nurses in their cheerful dresses of light gray. Blue is the color of the sisters' dresses. Ladies, bright, active, and different altogether from the old type of hospital nurse whom Dickens made us shudder to read of, and Miss Nightingale is helping us to abolish. The new building gave increased accommodation and provided for 40 probationers. The rules for admission remained practically the same as when the training school was first started at the old St. Thomas's. At a dinner to inaugurate the opening of the new hospital, the chairman, Sir Francis Hicks, related that Miss Nightingale had told him that she thought it the noblest building yet erected for the good of our kind. But our interest centers in the Nightingale wing. The dining hall is a pleasant apartment which contains several mementos of the lady whose name it bears. One is a unique piece of statuary enclosed in a glass case and standing on a pedestal. To the uninitiated, it might stand for a representation of a Vestal Virgin, but we know it to have a nobler prototype than the ideal of womanly perfection sacred to the Romans. That statuette is not the blameless priestess of Vesta, the world forgetting by the world forgot, but our heroine, whom the sculptor has modeled in the character of the Lady with the Lamp. She stands, a tall, slim figure, in simple nurse's dress, holding in one hand a small lamp, such as she used when going her nightly rounds at Scutari Hospital, which she is shading with the other hand. There is also a bust of Miss Nightingale in the hall, a portrait of her brother-in-law, the late Sir Harry Verney, for many years the chairman of the Council of the Nightingale Fund, and a portrait of Mrs. Wardroper, the first head of the Nightingale Home when originally founded. There is also a clock presented by the Grand Duchess of Baden, sister of the late Emperor Frederick of Germany, who was a great admirer of Miss Nightingale's work and herself an active organizer of relief for the sick soldiers during the Franco-German War. The dining hall leads into the nurse's sitting room. Each nurse has her own private room. The number of probationers slightly varies from year to year, but is usually 52, and there are always more applicants than can be entertained. They are divided into special probationers, who are gentlewomen by birth and education, daughters of professional men, clergymen, officers, merchants, and others of the upper and middle classes, from ages 24 to 30, and ordinary probationers. The special probationers are required to be trained to be future heads of hospitals or of departments of hospitals. They learn every detail of a nurse's work, and also the duties to fit them for responsible posts as matrons, etc. The ordinary probationers are trained to be efficient nurses, and after some years' service may obtain superior appointments. All nurses who have passed through St. Thomas's are united by a special tie to Miss Nightingale, who rejoices in their successes and likes to hear from time to time of the progress of their work in the various hospitals and institutions of which they have become heads. Mr. Bonham Carter, her old and valued friend, remains the secretary of the Nightingale Fund, and Miss Hamilton is the matron of the hospital and has control of the Nightingale Home. In the same year, 1871, that the new Nightingale Home and Training School was opened, Miss Nightingale published a valuable work on lying in hospitals, and 2 years later she made a new literary departure by the publication in Fraser's Magazine of 2 articles under the heading Notes of Interrogation, in which she dealt with religious doubts and problems. Miss Nightingale from her youth up has shown a deeply religious nature, and her attempt to grapple with some of the deep questions of faith, as she had thought them out in the solitude of her sick room, merit thoughtful consideration. Miss Nightingale has lived so entirely for the public good that her private family life is almost lost sight of, but her affections never ceased to twine themselves around the homes of her youth. After busy months in London occupied in literary work and the furthering of various schemes, came holidays spent at Lea Hurst and Embley with her parents, when she resumed her interest in all the old people and ministered to the wants of the sick poor. Though no longer able to lead an active life and visit amongst the people, she had a system of inquiry by which she kept herself informed of the wants and needs of her poorer friends. She was particularly interested in the young girls of the district, and liked to have them come to Lea Hurst for an afternoon's enjoyment, as in days gone by. It was soon known in the vicinity of her Derbyshire or Hampshire home when Miss Florence had arrived. In January 1874, Miss Nightingale sustained the first break in her old home life by the death of her father. He passed away peacefully at Embley in his 80th year, and was buried in East Willows churchyard. His tomb bears the inscription, William Edward Nightingale, of Embley in this county, and of Lea Hurst, Derbyshire. Died January 5, 1874, in his 80th year. And in thy light shall we see light. Psalm 36:9. After her father's death, Miss Nightingale spent much of her time with her widowed mother at Embley and Lea Hurst, between which residences the winter and summer were divided, as in the old days. It was well known that Miss Florence's preference was for Lea Hurst, and she would linger there some seasons until the last golden leaves had fallen from the beeches in her favorite walk in Lea Woods. Some of the old folks had passed away, and the young ones had settled in homes of their own, but no change in the family history of the people escaped Miss Florence. She ministered through her private almoner to the wants of the sick, and bestowed her name and blessing on many of the cottage babes. By her thoughtful provision, a supply of fresh, pure milk from the dairy of Lea Hurst was daily sent to those who were in special need of it. People on the estate recall that before she left in the autumn, Miss Florence always gave directions that a load of holly and evergreen should be cut from Lee Woods and sent to the nurses' home at St. Thomas's, the district nurses' home in Bloomsbury Square, and the Harley Street home, for Christmas decoration. On February 1st, 1880, Miss Nightingale suffered another loss in the death of her beloved mother, whose last years she had so faithfully tended as far as her strength would allow. Mrs. Nightingale, to whose beautiful character and example her famous daughter owes so much, passed away at Embley and was buried beside her husband in East Willows churchyard. Her tomb bears the inscription, "Devoted to the memory of our mother, Frances Nightingale, wife of William Edward Nightingale, Esquire. Died February 1st, 1880. God is love. 1 John 4:16. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. Psalm 103, 2. By F. Parthenope Verney and Florence Nightingale. After the death of her mother, Miss Nightingale still occasionally stayed at Lea Hurst and Embley, which had passed to her kinsman, Mr. William Shore Nightingale, and continued her old interest in the people of the district. In 1887, the members of a working men's club in Derbyshire presented Miss Nightingale with a painting of Lea Hurst, a gift which she received with peculiar pleasure. It was about this time that she paid her last visit to the loved home of her childhood. Miss Nightingale's time was now passed between her London house, 10 South Street, Park Lane, and Claydon, the beautiful home near Winslow, Buckinghamshire, of her sister, who had in 1859 become the second wife of Sir Harry Verney. Sir Harry was the son of Sir Harry Calvert, governor of Chelsea Hospital and adjutant general of the forces. He had been a major in the army, and in 1827 assumed the name of Verney. The family of Verney had been settled in Buckinghamshire since the 15th century. Sir Harry was, at various times, Member of Parliament for Bedford and also Buckingham. He was deeply interested in all matters of army reform, and in active sympathy with the schemes of his distinguished sister-in-law, and acted as chairman of the Nightingale Fund. At Claydon, Miss Nightingale found a beautiful and congenial holiday retreat with Sir Harry Verney and her beloved sister, who was well known in literary and political circles. Her books on social questions had the distinction of being quoted in the House of Commons. In the second year of her marriage, 1861, Lady Verney had laid the foundation stone of the new Buckinghamshire Infirmary at Aylesbury, the construction of which Miss Nightingale watched with great interest during her visits to Claydon. Her bust adorns the entrance hall of the infirmary. During her summer visits to Claydon, Miss Nightingale frequently gave garden parties for the sisters from St. Thomas's Hospital. Lady Verney died after a long and painful illness in 1890, sadly enough on May 12th, her sister's birthday. Sir Harry Verney survived his wife barely 4 years, and at his death Claydon passed to Sir Edmund Hope Verney, the son of his first marriage with the daughter of Admiral Sir George Donstown Hope. Sir Edmund was a gallant sailor, who as a young lieutenant had served in the Crimean War and received a Crimean Medal, Sebastopol clasp. He had again distinguished himself in the Indian Mutiny, was mentioned in dispatches, and received an Indian Medal, Lucknow clasp. He was Liberal MP for North Bucks 1885-6 and 1889-91, and represented Brixton on the first London County Council. Sir Edmund married the eldest daughter of Sir John Hay Williams and Lady Sarah, daughter of the first Earl Amherst, a lady who has taken an active part in the movement for higher education in Wales, and served for 7 years on a Welsh school board. She is a member of the Executive Committee of the Welsh University. Sir Edmund has estates in Anglesey. Lady Verney is a member of the County Education Committee for Buckinghamshire. She is continuing her mother-in-law's work of editing the Verney Memoirs. Sir Edmund takes great interest in education and rural questions. He is a member of the Bucks County Council and the Dairy Farmers Association, and has published articles on agricultural education and kindred subjects. After her sister's death, Miss Nightingale continued to pass some of her time at Claydon until, in 1895, increasing infirmity made the journey impracticable, and she has continued to interest herself in the rural affairs of the district. The suite of apartments which Miss Nightingale occupied at Claydon are preserved by Sir Edmund and Lady Verney as when she occupied them, and are now styled the Florence Nightingale rooms. They consist of a large, charmingly furnished sitting room with a domed ceiling, situated at a corner of the mansion and so commanding a double view over the grounds, and a bedroom and anteroom. Miss Nightingale's invalid couch still stands in her favorite corner of the sitting room, and beside it is a large china bowl, which loving hands once daily replenished with fresh flowers, such as our heroine loved to have about her when she occupied the room. In the adjoining apartment stands Miss Nightingale's half-tester bedstead, an old-fashioned carved wardrobe and chest of drawers. A large settee is at the foot of the bed, and was a favorite lounge with Miss Nightingale during the day. Pictures and family portraits hang on the various walls, and to these have been added, by Sir Edmund Verney, a series of interesting pictures culled from various sources to illustrate events in Miss Nightingale's work in the East. The rooms will doubtless, in time, form an historic museum in Claydon House. After her beloved sister's death, Miss Nightingale was sad and despondent, and one detects the note of weariness in a letter which she addressed in 1890 to the Manchester Police Court Mission for Lads. She was anxious that more should be done to reclaim first offenders and save them from the contaminating influences of prison life. "I have no power of following up this subject," she wrote, "though it has interested me all my life. For the last nearly 40 years I have been immersed in 2 objects, and undertaken what might well occupy 20 vigorous young people, and I am an old and overworked invalid." Happily, Miss Nightingale's work was not done yet. 2 years later, 1892, found her, at the age of 72, starting a vigorous health crusade in Buckinghamshire in particular, and in the rural districts generally. The 1890 Act for the Better Housing of the Working Classes specially roused her attention in a subject in which she had always been interested. She had little faith in Acts of Parliament reforming the habits of the people. On paper, she writes, there could not be a more perfect health directory than the Act for making our sanitary authorities and districts worthy of the name they bear. We have powers and definitions. Everything is provided except the 2 most necessary, the money to pay for, and the will to carry out the reforms. If the new Act were enforced, Miss Nightingale was of opinion that 3/4 of the rural districts in England would be depopulated, and we should have hundreds and hundreds of poor upon our hands, owing to the large proportion of houses unfit for habitation in the rural districts. In 1892 Miss Nightingale addressed a stirring letter to the Buckinghamshire County Council on the advisability of appointing a sanitary committee to deal with the health questions of the district. "We must create a public opinion which will drive the government," she wrote, "instead of the government having to drive us. An enlightened public opinion, wise in principles, wise in details. We hail the County Council as being or becoming one of the strongest engines in our favor, at once fathering and obeying the great impulse for national health against national and local disease. For we have learned that we have national health in our hands, local sanitation, national health. But we have to contend against centuries of superstition and generations of indifference. Let the County Council take the lead." Miss Nightingale believed that the best method for promoting sanitary reform among the people was to influence the women, the wives and mothers who had control of the domestic management of the homes. Her next step was, with the aid of the County Council Technical Instruction Committee, to arrange for a missioner to teach in the rural districts of Buckinghamshire. She selected 3 specially trained and educated women who were not only to give addresses in village schoolrooms on such matters as disinfection, personal cleanliness, ventilation, drainage, whitewashing, but were to visit the homes of the poor and give friendly instruction and advice to the women. She knew and respected the feeling that an Englishman regards his home, however humble, as a castle into which no one may enter uninvited. Miss Nightingale had no sympathy with the class of visiting ladies who lift the latch of a poor person's cottage and walk in without knocking. In launching her scheme of visitation, she did the courteous thing by writing a circular letter to the village mothers, asking them to receive the missioners. The letter runs, "Dear hard-working friends, I am a hard-working woman too. May I speak to you? And will you excuse me, though not a mother? You feel, with me, that every mother who brings a child into the world has the duty laid upon her of bringing up the child in such health as will enable him to do the work of his life. But though you toil all day for your children, and are so devoted to them, this is not at all an easy task. We should not attempt to practice dressmaking or any other trade without any training for it, but it is generally impossible for a woman to get any teaching about the management of health. Yet health is to be learned. Boys and girls must grow up healthy, with clean minds, clean bodies, and clean skins. And for this to be possible, the air, the earth, and the water that they grow up in and have around them must be clean. Fresh air, not bad air. Clean earth, not foul earth. Pure water, not dirty water. And the first teachings and impressions that they have at home must all be pure and gentle and firm. It is home that teaches the child, after all, more than any other schooling. A child learns before it is 3 whether it shall obey its mother or not, and before it is 7, wise men tell us that its character is formed. There is, too, another thing, orderliness. We know your daily toil and love. May not the busiest and hardest life be somewhat lightened, the day mapped out, so that each duty has the same hours? It is worth while to try to keep the family in health, to prevent the sorrow, the anxiety, the trouble of illness in the house, of which so much can be prevented. When a child has lost its health, how often the mother says, "Oh, if I had only known, but there was no one to tell me." And, after all, it is health and not sickness that is our natural state, the state that God intends for us. There are more people to pick us up when we fall than to enable us to stand upon our feet. God did not intend all mothers to be accompanied by doctors, but he meant all children to be cared for by mothers. God bless your work and labor of love. Florence Nightingale. Still following up the subject of rural sanitation, Miss Nightingale prepared a paper on rural hygiene, health teachings in towns and villages, which was read at the Conference of Women Workers at Leeds in November 1893. It was written in her usual clear and incisive manner, going straight to the root of the matter and illustrating her points with humorous illustrations. What can be done for the health of the home, she asks, without the women of the home? Let not England lag behind. It is a truism to say that the women who teach in India must know the languages, the religions, superstitions, and customs of the women to be taught in India. It ought to be a truism to say the very same for England. Referring to the village mothers, she says, "We must not talk to them or at them, but with them." As an instance of the happy-go-lucky style in which the sick cottagers are occasionally treated, Miss Nightingale relates the following amusing stories. A cottage mother, not so very poor, fell into the fire in a fit while she was preparing breakfast, and was badly burnt. We sent for the nearest doctor, who came at once, bringing his medicaments in his gig. The husband ran for the horse doctor, who did not come, but sent an ointment for a horse. The wise woman of the village came of her own accord and gave another ointment. "Well, Mrs. Y," said the lady who sent for the doctor, "and what did you do?" "Well, miss, I studied a bit, and then I mixed all three together, because then, I was sure I got the right one." The consequences to the poor woman may be imagined. Another poor woman, in a different county, took something which had been sent to her husband for a bad leg, believing herself to have fever. "Well, miss," she said, "it did me a sight of good, and look at me, bain't I quite pert?" The pertness ended in fever. The manners of the women to their children in many cases are greatly in need of reform, and Miss Nightingale quotes the injunction of an affectionate mother to her child about going to school: "I'll bang your brains out if you don't do it voluntarily." Miss Nightingale deals in her paper with the need for drastic measures to promote rural sanitation, such as drainage, proper water supply, scavenging, removal of dust and manure heaps from close proximity to the houses, and the inspection of dairies and cowsheds. In regard to the latter, she writes, "No inspection exists worthy of the name." This was in 1893, and the alarming facts about the non-inspection of rural milk supplies exposed in the Daily Chronicle in 1904 show that matters are little improved since Miss Nightingale laid an unerring finger on the defect 11 years ago. In addition to an independent medical officer and sanitary inspector under him, we want, said Miss Nightingale, a fully trained nurse for every district and a health missioner. And she defines her idea of the duties of a missioner. These women must, of course, be highly qualified for their work. They should visit the homes of the people to advocate rules of health. Persuade the careful housewife, who is afraid of dirt falling onto her clean grate, to remove the sack stuffed up the unused chimney. Teach the cottagers to open their windows in the most effective way for free ventilation. It is far more difficult to get people to avoid poisoned air than poisoned water, says Miss Nightingale, for they drink in poisoned air all night in their bedrooms. The mothers should be taught the value of a daily bath, the way to select nourishing food for their families, what to do till the doctor comes, and after he has left. However, the first great step for the missioner is to get the trust and friendship of the women. And this is not made by lecturing upon bedrooms, sculleries, styes, and wells in general, but by examination of particular rooms, etc. The missioner, above all, must not appear to pry into the homes, or talk down to the women. Neither should she give alms. The whole object of the recommendations was to teach people how to avoid sickness and poverty. Miss Nightingale's efforts to promote sanitary reforms were not confined to our own land, but extended to far-away India, a country in which she has, as we have already seen, taken a great interest. She had watched the success of some of the sanitary schemes carried out by the municipalities of large towns of India with satisfaction, but there yet remained the vast rural population, for which little was done. A very serious matter indeed, when we consider that 90% of the 240 millions of India dwell in small rural villages. Miss Nightingale prepared one of her searchlight papers on village sanitation in India, which was read before the tropical section of the 8th International Congress of Hygiene and Demography, held at Budapest in September 1894. In this, she considers the condition of the rural provinces of India from facts obtained by correspondence with people of authority on the spot, and deals with the defective sewage, water supply, and the difficulties arising from the insanitary habits of the people and their attachment to old customs. Still, she pleads, with a gentle and affectionate people like the Hindus, much may be accomplished by personal influence. I can give a striking instance within my own knowledge. In the Bombay Presidency there was a village which had for long years been decimated by cholera. The government had in vain been trying to move the village. No, they said, they would not go. They had been there since the time of the Marathas. It was a sacred spot, and they would not move now. At last, not long ago, a sanitary commissioner, dead now, alas, who by wise sympathy, practical knowledge and skill had conquered the confidence of the people, went to the panchayat, explained to them the case, and urged them to move to a spot which he pointed out to them as safe and accessible. By the next morning it had all been settled as he advised. The government of India is very powerful, and great things may be accomplished by official authority, but in such delicate matters affecting the homes and customs of a very conservative people, almost more may be done by personal influence exercised with kindly sympathy and respect for the prejudices of others. The celebration of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897 was an occasion of great interest to Miss Nightingale, and in her sick room she followed all the events of that joyous time with keen appreciation. She was delighted at the idea of making a special feature of nursing in the women's section of the Victorian era exhibition, and sent her Crimean carriage as an exhibit. All visitors to Earl's Court will recall the throngs of sightseers who stood all day long peering into the recesses of the old vehicle as eagerly as though they expected to still find some remnant of the wounded. There was no more popular exhibit on view, while the smiling nurses in their becoming uniforms who flitted about the nursing section were a living testimony to the revolution in the art of nursing which Florence Nightingale had effected. Lady George Hamilton, who had charge of this section, was in frequent consultation with Miss Nightingale while preparations were going forward. One of the most interesting celebrations of the Diamond Jubilee year was the dinner of the Balaclava Society on the anniversary of the famous charge, October 25th. After the loyal toasts, the health of Miss Nightingale was proposed by Mr. F. H. Roberts, who, amid ringing cheers, said, "Her name will live in the annals of England's regiments as long as England lasts." The company numbered 120, of whom 60 were survivors of the charge. Miss Nightingale has continued to take an interest in the Hospital for Invalid Gentlewomen at Harley Street, where she worked so assiduously before going to the Crimea. This most useful institution continues its efforts for the relief of sick ladies with unabated vigor, under the able Lady Superintendent, Miss Tidy, who has labored at her post now for 14 years. The home looks so bright and cheerful that it must have a very beneficial effect on the minds of those suffering women who seek its shelter. In the pretty reception room stands the old-fashioned mahogany escritoire, which Miss Nightingale used more than 50 years ago, when she voluntarily performed the drudgery of superintending the home. It was at this house in Harley Street that she stayed while organizing her nursing band for the Crimea, and from it she set forth for her journey to the East. In April 1902, Margaret, Lady Verney, laid the foundation stone of a new public library and village hall at Steeple Claydon. The cost of £1,500 was defrayed by Sir Edmund Verney. Miss Nightingale was much interested in the project, and sent the following message to Sir Edmund and Lady Verney. "So glad the foundation stone is being laid of the Steeple Claydon Public Library. I do with all my heart wish it success, and think a public library is good for body and soul. That God's blessing may rest upon it is the fervent wish of Florence Nightingale." Miss Nightingale also sent £50 for the purchase of books for the library. The institution of the Royal Pension Fund for Nurses, in which Queen Alexandra has taken such an active interest, was a subject of satisfaction to Miss Nightingale, as helping to improve the position of the sisterhood which she has so much at heart. She was deeply interested in hearing accounts of the garden parties given by the Queen, as Princess of Wales, to the nurses in the grounds of the Marlborough House, and also of the reception of the nurses by the Queen after the King's accession. End of section 24. Chapter 25 of The Life of Florence Nightingale by Sarah Tooley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. At Eventide. Miss Nightingale today. Her interest in passing events. Recent letter to Derbyshire nurses. Celebrates 84th birthday. King confers dignity of a Lady of Grace. Appointed by King Edward VII to the Order of Merit. Letter from the German Emperor. Elected to the honorary freedom of the City of London. Summary of her noble life. The golden evening brightens in the west. Soon, soon to faithful warriors comes their rest. Dr. Walsham Howe. The shadows of evening have fallen about the life of our revered heroine. Miss Nightingale has not left her London house for many years, and remains principally in bed. Her mind is still unclouded, and she follows with something of the old eager spirit the events of the day, more particularly those which relate to the nursing world. She is no longer able to deal personally with her correspondence, all of which passes through the hands of her secretary. Nothing gives her greater pleasure than to chat over past days with her old friends and fellow workers, and she occasionally receives, by invitation, members of the nursing profession who are heads of institutions with which her name is connected. She followed with intense interest the elaborate preparations made for dealing with the sick and wounded in the South African War, bringing home to her, as it so vividly did, the difficulties of the pioneer work at the time of the Crimean campaign. It gave her peculiar pleasure to receive and bid Godspeed to some of the nurses before their departure for South Africa. Even at her great age, Miss Nightingale retains the distinction of manner and speech which gave her such influence in the past, and now and again a flash of the old shrewd wit breaks out when views with which she is not in agreement are advanced. Her friends marvel most at the almost youthful roundness and placidity of her face. Time has scarcely printed a line on her brow or a wrinkle on her cheeks, or clouded the clearness of her penetrating eyes, which is the more remarkable when it is remembered that she has been a suffering and overworked invalid ever since her return from the Crimea. The dainty lace cap falling over the silver hair in long lapels gives a charming frame to Miss Nightingale's face, which is singularly beautiful in old age. When receiving a visitor, she seems, as one phrased it, to talk with her hands, which retain their beautiful shape, and which she has a habit of moving over the coverlet, as from a sitting posture she inclines towards her friends in the course of conversation. A delightful trait in Miss Nightingale's character is the honour which she pays to the women of a younger generation, who are now bearing the heat and burden of the day. "Will you give me your blessing?" said the superintendent of a benevolent institution to her recently, when taking her leave. "And you must give me your blessing," replied Miss Nightingale, as she took her hand. On another occasion she said to the same lady, after listening to an account of good work going successfully forward, "Why, you have put new life into me." No subject interests Miss Nightingale more today than that of district nursing. She inquires minutely into the experiences of those engaged amongst the sick poor. "Are the people improving in their habits?" is a question she often asks, or again, "Tell me about these model dwellings which they are putting up everywhere. Have they had a good effect on the personal habits of the people?" If a sister chances to mention some new invalid appliance, the old keen interest comes to the surface, and Miss Nightingale will have it all explained to her, even to the place where the apparatus was procured. The popularity of nursing as a profession is another topic of great interest to Miss Nightingale, and when she hears of more applications to enter the training home at St. Thomas's than the Council can entertain, she recalls the very different state of things when she used, in the early days, to issue her urgent call for recruits. While she is particularly anxious that a high standard of character and efficiency should be maintained amongst nurses, she keeps strictly to her original attitude that a nurse should be a nurse and not a medical woman. Miss Nightingale feels that ability to pass a technical examination does not necessarily prove that a woman will make a good nurse. It is a profession in which natural aptitude and personal character count for a great deal. To use a familiar axiom, a nurse is born, not made. Often Miss Nightingale's mind travels back to her old Derbyshire home. Embley has passed out of the family, but Lea Hurst is occupied by a relative, Mr. William Shore Nightingale, and Miss Nightingale keeps up her interest in the old people of the place. In August 1903, the late Honourable Frederick Strutt, the mayor of Derby and a distant cousin of Miss Nightingale's, entertained the nurses of the borough at Lea Hurst, which was specially lent for the occasion, and Miss Nightingale, hearing of what was about to take place, wrote the following letter to Mr. Strutt. "Will you," she said, "express to each and to all of them my very warmest wishes for their very highest success, in the best meaning of the word, in the life's work which they have chosen. We hear a great deal nowadays about nursing as a profession, but the question for each nurse is, am I living up to my profession? The nurse's life is above all a moral and practical life, a life not of show, but of practical action. I wish the nurses Godspeed in their work, and may each one strive with the best that is in her to act up to her profession, and to rise continually to a higher level of thought and practice, character and dutifulness." The reading of this letter from Miss Nightingale to the nurses assembled in the garden of her old home was an occasion of impressive interest. 50 years ago, she would not have predicted that Derby would ever possess such a large body of nurses, and still less that the members of the profession in Great Britain should have reached such a large total. "O small beginnings, ye are great and strong, based on a faithful heart and weariless brain. Ye build the future fair, ye conquer wrong, ye earn the crown and wear it not in vain." So far as her own personality is concerned, the founder of this sisterhood of ministry is a veiled and silent woman, shunning publicity. Her name has circled the globe, her deeds are known in every clime, and people cite her noble heroism without even knowing that she still lives. At such pains has Miss Nightingale been to keep herself in strict seclusion. The power of her fame, the brilliance of her example, and the wisdom of her counsels are a national heritage. Women who now wear the garb of a nurse with honor and dignity owe it to the lofty tradition which has come down with the first of the gracious dynasty. On May 12, 1904, Miss Nightingale was the recipient of many congratulations from her friends on the attainment of her 84th birthday, and the King paid a graceful compliment to the lady who is without doubt the most illustrious heroine in His Majesty's empire, by conferring upon her the dignity of a Lady of Grace of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem. Miss Nightingale received the Red Cross from Queen Victoria. A more unique honor was, however, yet in store for the heroine of the Crimea and the founder of the modern nursing movement. In November 1907, King Edward VII appointed Miss Nightingale to the Order of Merit, which was founded by His Majesty in 1902 and first announced in the Coronation Honours List. The King is sovereign of the order, which originally consisted of 12 men distinguished in war, science, letters, and art. Other names have since been added, but Florence Nightingale is the only woman placed amongst these immortals. The conferring of the order was not accompanied by any ceremony, as Miss Nightingale was unable, through failing health, to receive Sir Douglas Dawson, the representative appointed by the King, and the insignia was simply handed to Miss Nightingale's nephew. The badge of the order is a cross of red and blue enamel of 8 points, bearing the legend "For Merit" in gold letters within a laurel wreath. The reverse side shows the King's royal and imperial cipher in gold. Members of the order rank after the Order of the Bath, and use the letters O.M. The appointment of Miss Nightingale to the order was received with great enthusiasm throughout the country. The German Emperor, who was visiting our shores at the time, took occasion to pay Miss Nightingale a very graceful compliment by sending her a bouquet of flowers, accompanied by the following letter from the German ambassador. "Dear Miss Nightingale, His Majesty the Emperor, having just brought to a close a most enjoyable stay in the beautiful neighbourhood of your old home, Embley Park, near Romsey, has commanded me to present you with some flowers as a token of his esteem for the lady who, after receiving her education in nursing by the Sisters of Mercy at Kaiserwerth on the Rhine, rendered such invaluable services to the cause of humanity during the Crimean War, and subsequently founded a house for the training of nurses in England, which is justly considered to be a model institution of European fame. His Majesty sends you his best wishes, and I have the honor to remain, yours sincerely, P. Metternich, German Ambassador. The following letter was sent in reply. Your Excellency, I have the honor to acknowledge, on behalf of Miss Nightingale, the receipt of your letter today, and of the very beautiful flowers, which she greatly appreciated. Miss Nightingale desires me to request you to be good enough to convey to His Majesty the Emperor how much she values His Majesty's gracious expressions of esteem and good wishes. She has always thought most highly of the nursing of the Sisters of Mercy at Kaiserwerth. She also recalls with deep gratitude the friendship and sympathy with which His Majesty's august mother, the late Empress, was pleased to honor her. Miss Nightingale would write personally, but that failing health and eyesight prevent her. I have the honor, etc. K. Shore Nightingale. The City of London might most fittingly have bestowed its honorable freedom upon Miss Nightingale when she returned from the Crimea in 1856. But the heroine's retiring disposition and the conservatism of an ancient corporation stood in the way of that honor being bestowed. The late Baroness Burdett Coutts was the first woman presented with the freedom of the city, and she has had no successor until, in February 1908, the corporation, with the Lord Mayor presiding, passed with great enthusiasm the following resolution moved by Mr. Deputy Wallace: that the honorable freedom of this city, in a gold box of the value of 100 guineas, be presented to Miss Florence Nightingale, in testimony of this court's appreciation of her philanthropic and successful efforts for the improvement of hospital nursing and management, whereby invaluable results have been obtained for the alleviation of human suffering. Mr. Deputy Wallace, in moving the resolution, said that never in the history of the freedom of the city, including on its roll of fame the names of monarchs, statesmen, soldiers, and famous men of all kinds and of all callings, had it enrolled among the recipients of its honorary freedom a nobler name than that of Florence Nightingale. In accepting the honor of the freedom of the city, Miss Nightingale requested that the sum of 100 guineas, which it was proposed to spend on the gold box for containing the scroll, be given as a donation to the Queen Victoria Jubilee Institute for Nurses and the Hospital for Invalid Gentlewomen, Harley Street, of which Miss Nightingale was the first superintendent. The Court of Common Council acceded to Miss Nightingale's request, and arranged for an oak box to be used instead of the traditional gold casket. Miss Nightingale was unable to make the journey to the Guildhall to receive the freedom, and it was arranged that the presentation should be made, on her behalf, to her nearest relative. The ceremony took place on March 16, 1908, in the Council Chamber at the Guildhall, the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor, Sir John Bell, Knight Bachelor, presiding. There was a large attendance, invitations having been issued to leading medical and hospital authorities and to other representative people. There was a goodly gathering of nurses. The City Chamberlain, Sir Joseph Dimsdale, asked Mr. L. H. Shore Nightingale, who represented Miss Nightingale, to accept the casket containing the freedom, and made a most felicitous speech. A cheque for 106 guineas, to be devoted to any charities which Miss Nightingale was pleased to name, was given with the casket. Mr. Shore Nightingale replied, regretting that Miss Nightingale was unable to be present, and accepting the honour on her behalf. Mr. Henry Bonham Carter, for many years Secretary of the Nightingale Fund, gave an interesting account of his early recollections of Miss Nightingale, and related that on one occasion, when they were young people, she had given him first aid after an accident. In conclusion, he spoke of the high qualities of heart, mind, and character which had enabled Miss Nightingale to achieve such great and signal success in the work to which she devoted her life. We honor the soldier and applaud the valiant hero, but it required a more indomitable spirit, a higher courage, to purge the pestilential hospital of Scutari, to walk hour after hour its miles of fetid corridors crowded with suffering, even agonized humanity, than in the heat of battle to go down into the jaws of death, as did the noble 600. A grateful nation laid its offering at the feet of the heroine of the Crimea. Poets wafted her fame abroad, and the poor and suffering loved her. In barracks, in hospital, and in camp, the soldier has cause to bless her name for the comfort he enjoys. The sufferers in our hospital wards have trained nurses through her initiative. The sick poor are cared for in their own homes, and the paupers humanely tended in the workhouse, as a direct result of reforms which her example or counsel prompted. No honor or title can ennoble the name of Florence Nightingale. It is peerless by virtue of her heroic deeds. In Memoriam. The death of Miss Nightingale occurred somewhat suddenly on the afternoon of August 13, 1910, at her residence, 10 South Street, Park Lane. The cause of death was heart failure. She sank peacefully to rest in the presence of two of her relatives. Until the day before her death, she was in her usual health and bright spirits. In the previous May, she celebrated her 90th birthday, spending the day quietly with her household. On that occasion, she was the recipient of many congratulations from her friends, and the room was gay with spring flowers. The king, in the midst of his own bereavement, in the recent death of his father, was not unmindful of the heroine of the Crimea, and sent her the following message. To Miss Florence Nightingale, O.M. On the occasion of your 90th birthday, I offer you my heartfelt congratulations and trust that you are in good health. Signed, George, King and Emperor. On receiving the tidings of Miss Nightingale's death, the King sent the following telegram from Balmoral to her relatives. The Queen and I have received with deep regret the sad news of the death of Miss Florence Nightingale, whose untiring and devoted services to the British soldiers in the Crimea will never be forgotten, and to whose striking example we practically owe our present splendid organization of trained nurses. Please accept the expression of our sincere sympathy. George, King and Emperor. Amongst the soldier heroes in St. Paul's, or with the great ones in Westminster Abbey, would have been the fitting burial place for our greatest national heroine, whose deeds will live forever in the records of our country. But she ever shunned publicity, and in deference to her wishes, her funeral was not of a public character. The offer of the Dean and Chapter of Westminster of a burial place in the Abbey was declined by her executors. She was quietly laid to rest on Saturday, August 20th, in the little churchyard of East Wellow, Hampshire, near to her old home of Embley Park, and within sight of the hills where, as a child, she found her first patient in the old shepherd's dog. An impressive memorial service for those wishing to pay a tribute of love and honor to the heroine of the Crimea was held on the day of the funeral in St. Paul's Cathedral. On England's annals, through the long hereafter of her speech and song, a light its rays shall cast from portals of the past. A lady with a lamp shall stand in the great history of the land, a noble type of good, heroic womanhood. End of chapter 25. End of The Life of Florence Nightingale by Sarah Tooley.